Hello fellow collectors, I hope you're doing very well. Today I'd like to take some time to review this wonderful Christian Petzold box set from Plain Archive. I did do an unboxing of this one just a few weeks ago, so if anyone does want a closer look, please feel free to check out that video, where I make just a couple comments about the packaging. Today though, I'd like to talk about the films themselves. Now, I took a bit of a chance picking up this set, as I hadn't actually seen any of Petzold's films before. However, knowing Plain Archive's track record and taking a quick look into each film, I thought it would be a pretty safe bet. Well, as it turns out, this was actually a glorious pickup that I am absolutely delighted to own. Not least of all which, because the films themselves are actually really hard to find on Blu-ray for some reason, which is something that should definitely be rectified because more people need to know about this brilliant director and these wonderful films. Over the course of my collecting journey, it's one of my favourite things where you take an expensive chance and a risk on something, and it turns out as wonderfully as this has. Needless to say that I would have talked about them in my upcoming Best Films I Watched in June video, but I thought instead that they deserved a video of their own. I do go into some spoilers in a couple of my reviews, but I'll let you know when I'm about to do so that you can skip ahead to avoid them, and I have left timestamps in the description as well. Right, so let's get into it, and I'll go in date order here, so we'll start with Barbara, from 2012 and starring Nina Hoss and Ronald Zerfeld. I'll start by saying first of all that this was amazing. What an incredible film to start my journey into the films of Christian Petzold. It was enrapturing, moving and thoroughly engaging. It really drew me in incredibly well, and it does this with giving you surprisingly little information, and yet you know everything you need to know. It's a story about exile, doctors and their passion and caring despite circumstances. It's about love and sacrifice and brutality, all set with this political backdrop of the Cold War that simmers in the background of everything that's happening. Though again without really going into any of it at all, as the details are just not needed for the story. Nina Hoss carried the film on her shoulders and made it look effortless. She was utterly brilliant here, giving a fairly subdued performance, bordering this line of almost acceptance with her circumstances, but really resolve against them. Ronald Zerfeld is also fantastic here, and gives a really layered performance. But he goes about it in an almost lackadaisical fashion, showing in just such an interesting way that because you are in a certain area with a certain government doesn't mean you are a fanatic. But both of them together was a powerful and incredibly interesting pairing. There was one brilliant scene in particular which I really wasn't expecting, which really humanised the other side, if you will, in a really powerful way. And really brought home that this was people fighting people, not just ideology against ideology. It's something that I really love about films like this, because in all instances of conflict, things are not always black and white, and this film really threaded in the complexities in an expert way. This is also a film where I don't believe there was any musical score, which just emphasises how good the acting was, as well as the cinematography to keep you fixated throughout the runtime. Overall, it was profoundly compelling and deeply moving, so much so that it led me straight away into more of this box set. I'll also say that I wish we got more German films about the Cold War, though perhaps I just don't know where to look. Having watched a few John le Carré adaptations recently, I'd love to see more from the German perspective, as their country was really the crux of it. So if anyone has any recommendations, please do let me know. Then we have Phoenix, from 2014 and starring again Nina Hoss and Ronald Zerfeld as our main characters, along with Nina Kunzendorf. And again, simply wow, another triumph from Petzold. This is a film that slowly decimates you. A stunningly sombre and heartbreaking piece of filmmaking that has one of the most powerful endings you're likely to ever see. I found it really quite difficult to share my thoughts on this one without delving into spoilers, which go middle of the road-ish. They won't ruin the whole story, but I do go into some of it, so if you haven't seen this one and don't want any spoilers, please do skip onto my next review at the time I'll put it on the screen now, or that you can find in the description down below. So, continuing on. Nina Hoss delivers again a tour de force performance as a returning prisoner of Auschwitz, broken in body, mind and soul. We meet her with a bandage covering her face on her way to a hospital, as some unnamed horror has clearly been inflicted upon her and plastic surgery is required. I thought this was an incredibly powerful piece of the story, as the facial reconstruction truly eliminates her identity on the outside, mirroring the identity that has already been mostly ripped away from her on the inside by war, torture, and the inhuman treatment she's suffered. And that's what I think this film is about at its core: identity, and who she is, and whether or not that can truly be taken away from us. The film is the type of story where one of the main characters is kept in the dark for the majority of the film, which we the audience are very aware of. It's often a story style that I'm not too fond of, but this one of course is no usual story of this kind, and it actually works powerfully well here. So we have a brutalised woman back from a concentration camp into a Berlin fresh out of war, but by no means peaceful or safe. Her one task now to find her husband. It was her love for him and the hope of seeing him again that was the only thing that kept her alive when so many others around her died. However, is he the man that she thought he was? As the story continues, you see her wanting to think the best, wanting to reason, wanting to find the logic behind his actions, and to cling to the firm belief that he was and is the man she thought he was. That element of hope from Hoss's performance really reaches out from the screen to touch you and really keeps you with her throughout the course of the story. This film deals crushing blow after crushing blow and keeps you guessing at the true motivations of her husband, played again incredibly well by Ronald Zerfeld. It's a film that becomes increasingly heartbreaking and really quite a savage film in so many ways, but so gently directed, I think. Christian Petzold is clearly a master at his craft and has made something truly special here. Then next we have Transit, from 2018 and starring Franz Rogowski and Paula Beer, along with Lillian Batman, Mayam Zuri and Gerhard Gieser. This one didn't work quite as well for me as the previous two, but was still a solidly crafted, acted and directed, and still a very engaging story for the most part. This is a film about refugees and a refugee crisis, but one with a twist in order to really bring the reality home to those of us watching with a Western perspective. It's a film which really tries to show us the reality and show that these things can happen to us all, and how truly awful and brutal the plight of people running for their lives with their families can be. The human collateral that is just discarded as a side effect of it. Truly heartbreaking, which seems to be a bit of a theme with Christian Petzold's films. Again, it's a film which doesn't overshare information. You know exactly what you need to know and nothing more. However, in this case, I think I would have actually liked a bit more information about the wider circumstances going on in Europe. I won't say that it was necessary to the story, but I'll just say that I was curious, to say the least, and that curiosity endured to the end of the film and beyond. And I think it could have been something interesting to just inform the background of the action that we see. Despite that though, Petzold seems to be a real master of doing this, of giving you such a little amount of wider information in his films, and so it just means that there is nothing superfluous to distract you from the core story, and yet you know everything you need to in order to fully engage with it. We have a stunningly good performance here from Franz Rogowski, who appears to be an incredibly skilled and versatile actor, who I'll speak about more in the next one as well. Paula Beer has a great air of mystery and allure surrounding her in this one, and she also gives a solid performance. And now into spoilers for the film, and they will be fairly heavy spoilers for this one, so again, please skip forward to the time on the screen or in the description down below if you'd like to avoid them. Okay, so let's get a little bit more into the story, as well as into the different pieces that I wasn't really a fan of. So we start off in Paris, which is clearly under some occupying force, and we meet our protagonist, Georg. He's asked to deliver a letter to a writer, and so he finds the writer's hotel, but he comes across the bloody aftermath of the writer's death. He manages to take a few of the writer's personal effects, including his latest manuscript and ID documents. He then escapes Paris in a train compartment along with a wounded friend of his, as they are making their way to Marseille, where they are hoping to get passage on a boat and to get out of France and Europe. To pass time on the journey, Georg starts to read the manuscript and he learns about the writer's life, including that his wife had recently left him. So they arrive in Marseille, but sadly he discovers that his companion has died of his wounds. Straight away, Georg makes his way to his friend's family and tells them the sad news. Now this is key for me, because he tells them immediately that his companion had died, as of course you would expect him to do. As Georg stays in Marseille, he takes on the identity of this writer because it turns out that the Mexican consulate has already granted him passage for both himself, the writer, and his wife Marie, played by Paula Beer. Georg comes to see Marie around Marseille more and more, and he slowly comes to realise who she is, and as you might imagine, their stories start to intertwine as the film goes on. So far a pretty interesting story that really kept me engaged, wondering about what is going to happen. We've already seen death, we've heard the occupying forces are on the move and making their way to Marseille, and there is no stopping them, and so clearly escape is of the utmost importance. The film also includes several supporting characters which really flesh out the refugee experience, as you see the same faces in various places around Marseille, and you see the defeat, the resolve, the worry, the frustrations, and also the abuse that they suffer from hotel owners, bureaucrats, the police, etc., as they wait to hopefully leave and finally find safety somewhere else. So, what elements did I not like? Well, the biggest one for me, and why I stressed Georg telling his travel companion's family that he had died straight away, is that he never tells Marie, the writer's wife, that the writer is dead. Story-wise, it just made no sense to me whatsoever, as it seemed clear to me that he could get exactly what he wanted, i.e. Marie to join him, by revealing the truth to her, and it's what I was waiting for throughout the course of the film, and yet was left unsatisfied by the end. There was also a lot of what I felt was quite silly back and forth, with characters making a decision and then going back on it, then making a decision, then going back on it. For example, people getting on a boat to leave, then getting off, then getting on, then getting off. So many times that it just became quite annoying over the course of the runtime, especially when many of those decisions, I felt at least, could have been solved by revealing this key piece of information that Georg has, and also in the face of surely crippling fear that the occupying force is inexorably closing in. So overall then, for me this one had a very promising start, but did frustrate me a little bit as the story went on. However, that being said, this was still a solid enough film and very thought-provoking, as it really touches on some hard truths about refugees and their dire circumstances, and really encourages some empathy from the viewer. I think though for me this was a case of the ingredients all being there, but in the end the cake just not tasting quite as good as you know it could have. And lastly we have Undine, from 2020 and starring again Paula Beer and Franz Rogowski, as well as Mayam Zari. Now, unlike the other three films I've talked about, which all had fairly clear-cut stories, Undine is not quite so clear-cut, and actually for me anyway has been quite difficult to pin down. So, what do I make of this one? Possibly it's a fable or perhaps a modern fairy tale, I'm still not really quite sure, but it does have some key fantastical qualities. What I do know is that this is a story about love, an enduring, enrapturing and all-consuming love. something which is at the same time beautiful but yet scary in its power. To begin with, let's talk about the title, Undine, which is apparently a mythological figure like a water nymph who becomes human when she falls in love with a man, but is doomed to die if he is unfaithful to her. I think sort of like a mix between a mermaid and a siren type of creature. Our Undine, in this case, played superbly by Paula Beer, whose performance I liked a lot more here than in Transit, despite that also being solid enough from her, of course. But in this film I felt like she was really able to flex her acting skills a bit more, and she really shines, and particularly with the sort of mythical air that such a creature might have. Franz Rogowski is also absolutely excellent again as well, and together they make a powerful pairing with wonderful chemistry, where you are thoroughly engaged in their stories. How often when we love, do we love so completely, so freely? I think the parts of this film where the love story really pushed through are truly wonderful and have such a rich depth to them. You can't help but be drawn in completely by the joy and the ferocity of the passion between these two characters that they have for each other. A love story, however, is not the only thing that is going on, and there is more layers to this one than just that. Former relationships and sparks of attraction, consequences to actions, mystery and violence all weave their threads through this story, coming together to create something quite mesmerising and even a bit confounding. Berlin itself also plays an important role here, almost being an active background character. I think there is some interesting commentary here about romantic relationships and how we treat each other, where this film is able to take things to the extreme to illustrate how deeply we can hurt and be hurt, how deeply we can love and be loved, and the severe consequences of our mistakes, and yet how light we can make of them at the time. And so, a bit of a mystical tale, perhaps with shades of allegory or parable. I'm still not really quite sure what to make of this film, truth be told, but I do know that it has stayed with me and it's been swimming around my thoughts since I saw it, if you'll excuse the pun. Is true love possible? Is it by its very nature mystical and magical? Maybe. And so, that brings us to the end of the video. If you are familiar with the films of Christian Petzold, then I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts, and if you weren't familiar with him, then I really hope I've been able to spark some interest for you to check them out. He's a director that I am so happy to have discovered, with an incredible filmography. I actually just bought Yella, a film of his from 2007 starring Nina Hoss, which arrived just a couple days ago, as I hope to continue my journey into his films. This is one that is just on DVD, and actually that DVD looks to be out of print as I had to get it second hand, and a Blu-ray doesn't appear to exist, which just brings me back to saying, as I did at the beginning, that I really wish his films were more widely available because they absolutely deserve to be. If you're in the US, as the Criterion sale is in full swing at the moment, they have released his film Phoenix, which I'm sure they've done a great job with, so maybe one to add to your list to pick up. Well, that's everything from me. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.